Yes, good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me. So I have a couple of slides to update you about the DARWIN EU network, and may I just say it's a privilege to follow on the updates on the clinical trial initiatives and on the update from the BDSG. So let's then move on to the next slide, please. I'd like to start by linking the work on DARWIN EU to the European Medicines Regulatory Network strategy to 2025. And it's the vision that by 2025, we would like the use of real-world evidence to be enabled and its value to be established across a number of regulatory use cases. And these might be later touched upon in the presentation, what they actually mean for each of the medicinal product lifecycle and the work of the committees. Next slide then, please. So the DARWIN EU network is a network which is a federated network of data, expertise, and services that will support the decision-making by EMA committees, but also by other decision-making bodies at national level, and hopefully by other stakeholders such as the health technology assessment bodies and payers through the product lifecycle and through the use of evidence generated from real-world, routinely collected healthcare data. So at the heart of the network is the coordination center here in orange, and we have just appointed the Erasmus University Medical Center Rotterdam to perform these services. The center will coordinate and maintain the network, onboard and maintain the data partners, and perform the scientific studies. In contact with the center is obviously the EMA here in a blue dot, and through the EMA, the studies can be ordered through the coordination center via any of the EMA's committees and via national competent authorities, the Commission, perhaps sister agencies in the future, such as the ECDC, HTA bodies, and payers. The network will incorporate data partners either directly at the moment or in the future as the European health data space develops through the data permit authorities. And in its federated model, the main features are that the data will stay local, which is certainly very useful and simplifying matters of data protection. And the common data model will be used where possible, which will again simplify and accelerate the conduct of the studies and standardize the data and its quality and pave the way for using several data sources with the same code. Next slide then, please. So what will the network do? Starting at the top, the network will provide the expertise in formulating and executing studies and analyses to support the regulatory decision-making. It will also maintain a catalog of known relevant data sources in the EU and ensure their discoverability and quality of the data. This will help any stakeholder looking to perform studies in obtaining real-world evidence and aid the identification of the relevant data sources, be it on the size of the data source or on the type of data, whether it's primary, secondary use, etc. The network will also maintain and expand the network of data partners. These will be onboarded every year, and the data partners will be assisted in achieving the required data quality standards and advised on the use of common data model if they're not currently doing it. Importantly, the network will conduct the scientific studies on behalf of the European Medicines Regulatory Network and the EMA, and I'll have more on that later. The network will also deliver training, governance, and some business services, and link with the use of the European health data space. We will be piloting the EHDS through this year, and the DARWIN EU network will serve as an early pathfinder for the EHDS. Next slide then, please. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the process for conducting the studies. So starting top left with a research question which needs answering because it affects the committee decision-making by an EMA or NCA committee. This will be then defined into a research question, moving one down on the left-hand side, and the feasibility of such an analysis will be looked at. We will then pass over to the coordination center, who will be creating the study protocol and the code for the analysis. They will be in contact with the data partners who might have the relevant data, and they will manage the study from ethical approval through the conduct and through obtaining a report. So the code will be provided to the data partners at the bottom on the left-hand side, and they will receive and run the code in their own databases, essentially executing the study, obtaining the results. The aggregated results will be then provided to the coordination center, and the center will receive, collate, check the analysis, and produce a study report with the results. Moving to the second row on the right-hand side, the results are then shared with the EMA and processed into the assessments at the top, into the regulatory decision-making by the committees, whether they're EMA or NCAs. Next slide then, please. So we believe that there's wide benefits from the network being established, and certainly starting very close to home with the EU medicines regulators. The real-world evidence that can be obtained will support drug development and the decisions on planning of the development at the EMA, with disease epidemiology, addressing unmet medical need, looking at historical controls and planning of future studies for feasibility. Certainly at the authorization of medicines step, this could contribute to the discussions on benefit risk, looking at external controls, generalizability extrapolations to the general populations or at-risk populations, and certainly so for post-authorization in the benefit risk monitoring and looking further later onto the extension of indications and the effectiveness of risk minimization measures. So the network will, on one hand, increase the capacity, but also the capability for the observational studies. And by having this standardized and already established infrastructure, we'll also reduce the time when we can obtain the evidence. On the right-hand side, then, benefits for all the other stakeholders, include the patients and healthcare professionals, will benefit from faster access through the accelerated drug development to new innovative medicines and optimizing the safe and effective use in post-marketing monitoring. The use of the European Health Data Space will be piloted as it's developing by the European Commission. The national competent authorities will benefit from the real-world evidence to support the health policy and delivery of healthcare. Similarly, HTA bodies and payers will benefit from the real-world evidence in their own decision-making on cost effectiveness, on their assessments and reassessments. Working then with the EU and other health agencies, we can pilot this year and see what benefits this brings for sister agencies such as the ECDC, and that could be, for example, in the field of monitoring vaccine effectiveness. Academia and research organizations certainly benefiting from the methodology development, the increased use and acceptability of real-world evidence, and increased data quality. And last but not least, certainly the industry whose decision-making would be accelerated through the better support with real-world evidence and the time and drug development and the cost reduced. Next slide then, please. So how we will get there involves a 5-year roadmap. There are 2 implementation or establishment phases foreseen, phase 1 and 2, that's this year and next year. And through these 2 phases, we would already like to start executing the studies to support the decision-making by the committees and therefore delivering the first benefits. So before we can do that, we certainly have a number of tasks to establish and set up the coordination center. We will be performing a data protection impact assessment to identify and minimize the risks in data protection, certainly. Then move on to recruiting the data partners, onboard them into the network, and we'll be piloting with the EHDS, as I mentioned. Of course, we will continue consulting the stakeholders either through the DARWIN EU Advisory Board or through certain events, workshops planned throughout the year. And it's our intention that then in the next phase, in phase 2, we can routinely support the committees with real-world evidence. And certainly when we move into the operation phase in 2024, the network will be scaled up and routinely able to support the decision-making. In the later years of operations in 25 and 26, the network should be operational and evolve yearly, incorporate further data partners, and be able to address the use cases and research questions from committees and other stakeholders, and also integrate with the European Health Data Space. Next slide. I think I've got only 1 or 2 more. Yes, so our immediate next steps with the coordination center are focusing on the establishment on the left-hand side, the formation of the governance, on the technology operations team, on the scientific panel as one of the advisory boards, and establishing the project management with a project plan and the matters relating to risk management. Within the 6 months on the right-hand side, we would then be working on the requirements and solution design, establishing a thorough conflict of interest management process, working with the coordination center on the management plan for the network operation and the business plan for the expansion of the network, look at the templates for onboarding the data partners and templates for the matters relating to scientific studies, so be it a study outline, feasibility assessment form, a study protocol, or study report. And moving then to onboarding the data partners, we expect to be doing that from the half of 2022 onwards or so. And it's our intention to have a diverse set of data sources available such that we can cover any of the use cases linking back to how medicines are used. So primary care data, specialist use data, hospital data, electronic health records, perhaps some insurance claims data, certainly disease registries for rare diseases and smaller patient populations medicines use. And as we've already heard in the previous talk, the patient-reported outcomes is something we would be working on through a dedicated meeting in summer, trying to map out what patient-reported outcomes these should be and what their role is. And certainly, we would be very open to including those in DARWIN EU and in the analysis, and so further work is expected there. We would then start the first studies in 2022, and we'd like to pilot these across the use cases through any of the committees, be it orphan designation, disease epidemiology, etc. And in total, then moving to the post-authorization supervision on monitoring of risks, drug utilization, etc. And in total, over the 5 years of the implementation timeline I told you about, we expect 380 plus studies to be conducted through the network. So I don't have a conclusive slide, but I've got a number of the reasons why, if I may. And so why the real-world data and evidence generated through DARWIN can be useful. So certainly it will be filling in knowledge gaps where we currently don't have sufficient data in the decision-making, maybe because the data is single arm only, or it's outdated, or a look at the subpopulation or another sensitivity analysis cannot be done. It will also increase the transparency and work with the needs of the committees through involvement in each of the steps of the studies. Increasing the capacity on one hand, but also decreasing the time to obtaining the results. So faster evidence generation will be important. And then avoiding the duplication and reducing unnecessary fractured and duplicate studies through industry. I then have one more slide of the use cases next. And we identified 3 areas where the real-world data, real-world evidence can support committees' decision-making. So this is first on the planning and validity of studies by the applicants and marketing authorization holders. So this is both ahead, looking at whether the studies are feasible, are there sufficient patient numbers such that we can obtain the necessary study, and then looking at the representativeness and the validity of completed studies. For example, are the patients currently treated of the same characteristics of the same disease severity and comorbidities? In the middle then, to understand the clinical context, certainly we can provide studies of disease epidemiology, whether it's for an orphan designation or for new diseases and paving the way to new therapeutics, looking at clinical management of these diseases, whether it's the treatment according to the guidelines, what is the first line, what is the second line treatment, where does the current medicine fit, and on drug utilization for a particular medicine. Is it in line with DSPC? Who are the patients? What's the frequency of treatment? What is the duration, if it, for example, shouldn't be that long? Lastly, and certainly moving to the classical pharmacoepidemiology, the associations and impact studies, whether they are for safety, outcomes or for effectiveness, these can certainly be delivered, and studies looking at impact of regulatory actions and decisions and effectiveness of risk minimization measures. So to the next slide. Lastly, we also see a very important role for the network in the crisis planning and response. And one of the use cases would be looking at medicines use in a drug utilization study way to monitor the demand and predict and help manage shortages of medicines. Understanding the natural history of diseases, such as happened with COVID-19, for example, in the last 2 years, helping to develop the vaccines and therapeutics, and also help understand what are the background rates of important adverse events of special interest. The evidence can be also obtained for repurposing of medicines, and certainly this seems like a very suitable and ideal source of data where already evidence is gathered in the healthcare data sources. And through still crisis work, we could be monitoring the safety and effectiveness of vaccines and other therapeutics in post-authorization. So the network will certainly provide such infrastructure, and having it ready in place with standardized analytics will allow us to do that faster and more complete. I think I have only one more slide now. This is to provide you with further information. Certainly, the DARWIN EU website is a good start. The Coordination Center will have their own dedicated website. If there are any technical questions to them, this would be the contact address. And if you'd like to subscribe to the Big Data Highlights newsletter that Jesper mentioned, then certainly you can do that via the email address at the bottom. Thank you very much. I'm obviously happy to take any questions.